Some years ago, I had an opportunity to travel to South Korea as part of an economic development trip on behalf of Montgomery County in Cheonbuk Province in South Korea. And I made the usual pitch about Montgomery County, that we had a well-educated community, that our citizens were actively engaged in a variety of areas, especially in the areas of biotechnology, and listed most of the assets you would think that any elected official would provide a reference to their county or city or state. And the South Koreans sort of looked at me in amazement. And I was not receiving this warm embrace back in terms of the pitch that I made. And I tried virtually every approach that I could make. I even said that our county had great traffic, that it was easy to move around Montgomery County. And all the looks that I received were somewhat in amazement. And finally I said, we're adjacent to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. And the eyes lit up, the response was much more embracing, and it made a connection. So I want to share with my friend, County Executive Baker, in his comments in reference to Washington. There are an awful lot of things that we can do in our respective jurisdictions, but the real center of the activity, economic, politically, socially, is around the District of Columbia. As goes the district, so goes our region, and many of the things that we're looking at involved in economic development. And there are many, and the many that we've talked about simply reverberate around a couple of things. One of which is transportation. Our ability or inability to solve and to deal effectively with transportation is a cornerstone to our ability to enhance economic development for the future. But our challenges as leaders in this region is simply not how we find ways in which to place before our residents areas of potential challenges and how we can overcome those. But more importantly, how do we convey to our residents the essence that regionalism is important? Because we are elected by those people who believe our sole responsibility is to look after their particular interests in a very narrow and a parochial manner. And so the disconnect that we have is that our citizenry will not embrace the concept of regionalism as we currently see it today, because regionalism means something that is very local. And that's where the problem is. For example, I was at a town hall meeting last night in the community of Only. And someone asked the question of me, why is it that Montgomery County provided resources and a number of public safety officials that we sent to Baltimore in reference to the riot? And so secondly, how are we paying for that? And I was amazed by the question that it was so narrow. So narrow. This is within the state, less than 35 miles away from where we actually stood last night, and not recognizing the interconnectivity of what happens in Baltimore as it affects the rest of the state of Maryland. Similarly, when we talk about economic development around this region, it is important that we do a much better job of properly educating our community as to the value of that. That value is important. So, if I were to look at what we are challenged and the focus that we have, it is one, to convey the message that regionalism is important. In the area of economic development, it is significant because people do not make that connection. It is about how that affects my tax base. It is about how it affects my quality of life. It is about how the things in my community are affected by the question of regionalism. And so the task before us is not to lay out simply plans that suggest, A, that those things that we typically think of that are important for which we should work on, transportation, public safety, the environment, the economy, how all of those things are interrelated, But more importantly, how is it that we can convince our residents in our respective jurisdictions that the idea of regionalism in the first place is something that we should embrace? Because so long as elected officials believe that their political future is tied to solely responding to our residents within our communities, and they do not see the long-term impact and implications of regionalism as it affects many of the things I've just described, we can only go so far in that conversation. It is good to talk about it. It is good to have forums about it. It is good for us to come together periodically and discuss that. But unless we are able to convince the residents that this is important, then we will only go so far in our ability to develop the sort of regionalism that embraces the entire community. That, to me, is the most significant step. That, to me, is the direction that we should place a great deal of emphasis and time and attention on. How do we engage in our respective communities? Some years ago, when I served on the county council, we had Councilmember Patterson from the District of Columbia, who actually came to Montgomery County to discuss a project in Montgomery County, that is the redevelopment of Friendship Heights, adjacent to the District of Columbia, and she represented that area. And I recall the sort of negative response that our council at that time gave in response to her inquiries about traffic, why we could not develop together along Wisconsin Avenue and Western Avenue, the implications of what we were considered in Montgomery County would have on the District of Columbia, and was totally ignored. Just 5 months later, I had an opportunity to travel to Howard County to talk about the development in Howard County along the corridor of 216 and Route 29. And the Howard County people told me in no uncertain terms, A, you've developed your section of Montgomery County. You've had the opportunity to develop it over many years. And now, in so many words, how dare you come to us when we are now in the process of development areas of growth for our communities. Those two examples have stayed with me for a long period of time, because the people in Montgomery County, unfortunately, were looking narrowly at its side of Western Avenue. And the people in Montgomery County were looking, in Howard County, were looking too narrowly on their side of Route 29 and the Patuxent River. We have to move away from that. And so our task, I think, should be uniformly, how do we engage the citizenry, how do we engage the broader community to the economic impacts, the benefit for all of us on regionalism as we go forward. If we're able to resolve that, I'm convinced that we're able to resolve many of the challenges related to transportation, public safety, the environment, and many other things that help us. Most recently, County Executive Baker and the Mayor, District Bowser and I had a regional conference related to homelessness. And it was something that I thought was well received, because seldom do we come together on an issue such as homelessness, because we're generally talking about other issues. But it is part of a social fabric that impacts all of our communities. And I think that we need to do much more of that, of those areas that impact people at a level for which we have not discussed in the past. Again, let me thank you, especially Mr. Mayor, and your work and your leadership over the years and leadership that you've provided in this region. And I know that you will continue to do so for many, many years to come. And thank you personally for your friendship and what you've done for this entire region and your leadership as Mayor of Alexandria. Thank you very much.